this one is going to be interesting, and I don't think I briefed Spencer on the topic. Nothing should surprise you. You've handled worse, Jason, so I know you can handle it. Today, the hot topic that I've been avoiding on every podcast, even though it keeps coming up, is aluminum versus UPVC windows from an installer standpoint. And so I should give a little bit of context here. I think you know Spencer, and I'm happy you'll get to know each other on this conversation. But Spencer obviously comes from Schuko background, high-end thermal penetration side, but he also has extensive experience in passive house, and that got him an introduction or more exposure to the UPVC side for the thermal benefits. So first of all, thank you both for coming on, and that's the context. So Jason, maybe the first time we spoke, it was a lot about Quest and your introduction into the DC market and how you really effed up this window wall market with your bypass system. But maybe you could talk a little bit about now this new era that you've seen with a push to different materials.
Yeah, so I've been saying for a couple of years, I think the aluminum punch window is going to become, if not already becoming in front of us, a dinosaur. I think there's always going to be spots for them, like historic and high end, but what's happened in UPVC, and I've given a few presentations on this, and Spencer, I saw the facial expression. I am an aluminum salesman at heart. I do not like what UPVC is doing, but at some point you got to stop swimming against the current. So, we have seen UPVC be able to get testing, be able to get AW tests and CW testing, and get all this, check all the same marks as aluminum. With that said, we know that with UPVC, you can't lift it with power cups because the corners are not strong enough. So we know inherently that UPVC is not going to be as strong, and you got to be a little more careful with it when you're moving it around the site. One of the least favorite parts for me in UPVC as an installer, most of the systems require the glass to come out. Put a screw through the fastener in the vertical mullion, and then field glaze it. We have guys that can field glaze, no problem, but no one prefers field glazing over factory glazing. So I know there are some solutions that are out there, but for the most part, you're still taking glass out and you're having to deal with that part of it because you can't make the kind of accessories you can with aluminum with UPVC. It costs $100,000 for a die for UPVC opposed to $2,000 for aluminum. So,
did you just say an aluminum die costs $2,000? So what are you going to do when people say they charge $10,000? You just exposed the entire aluminum industry.
Right now, we'll make dies at cost if you're buying windows. It's all good. But we are having success with Ray Howe, they've been around forever. They make all the bumpers and the trims for Mercedes and BMW. They're a $50 billion company. The problem with guys like Ray Howe historically is anyone's fabricating it out of the garage, and you have to have proper fabrication, proper testing, proper installation accessories. So we're working with a company called Leon Integra. I'll throw a plug out there. They are fabricating out of Turkey. Obviously, we're all chasing Intis, which really changed the market and dinosaur aluminum, in my opinion. They did a good job getting the testing right and steering that. The installation is pretty similar, though. There's not a huge amount of difference. Receptor systems are nice. Aluminum is certainly easier to leave the windows out, put a receptor in, put the masonry in, don't destroy the window, put the glass in afterwards. There are companies doing aluminum receptor with UPVC, but I have a theory that you're going to see different colors happening in the next 10 years. So you're going to see aluminum fade at a different rate than the UPVC, and you're going to have an aluminum trim with a different coloration than the window inside of it because they're mixed and matching these products. So I think we're going to see some downfall from that in the future.
So I really don't want to hijack this conversation because I've said a lot of the same things I'm going to repeat a lot of the same things I've already said. So I'm going to try to trigger Spencer. You said a few words, a certain country that he's had a little bit of friction with, and then a certain material he's had a little bit of friction with. But two, maybe three comments on what you said. A, how quickly do you see Ray Howe making aluminum products? Because, they already are?
Yeah.
Okay, because I've seen this massive trend of a lot of UPVC suppliers going into aluminum and then vice versa, aluminum suppliers going into UPVC. So I find it quite humorous, and I've started to try to trigger them a little bit. All the people that downsell either aluminum or downsell UPVC, and then they find themselves in a situation where they're selling both. So that I think is funny, but an aside. From the field glazing versus factory glazing or pre-glazing concept, is it when you can either get a unit of a certain size in a master frame, that is their limitation, versus when you have to mold together units, that's where you get into trouble?
Correct. And they can go pretty big. I mean, anything they can fit in a crate. And we got some at a project in Virginia where they're sending us 14-foot frames with vertical intermediates, and we're not having to field mull, but that has its limits. If that weren't first floor, we wouldn't be doing it because you wouldn't hit the structure.
There you
So
go.
there are limitations.
It's
to that
an
equation.
interior product.
Right. We're not going to the air with it.
Spencer, maybe you can speak a little bit to this because the project I've seen with you and you had exposure to was a mega high-rise project with aluminum and UPVC.
I've been doing this for a while now in the glazing industry with Passive House since around like 2009, 2010, right, is when I kind of first got into it. The thermal performance is the huge value add in a lot of these projects. If we're talking about the European frames, right? I mean, look, you look at the glazing industry in North America, the US, like there's tons of vinyl for residential that is not coming from Europe, right? So that's kind of the context I think you can think about vinyl, but
why do you think that is? Why do you think that UPVC can't be competitive in North American manufacturing?
No,
I agree with you. I just don't know why.
I think it can be. I just think that in general, the code let's say the performance requirements, like the structural and like design requirements for most single family residential applications at scale are like very different from what you would sell an aluminum window for, or like a custom European window. Like the European, like steel reinforced frames with multiple chambers, tilt turn function, it's like overkill for a lot of like the applications in the residential market. Like I remember, first offering like Schuko PVC in the Massachusetts area, and people would look at the window section and think it was a door. They're like, why are you trying to sell a terrace door for the window? What are you doing? And then you explain like the sizing, the function, and all behind that is like the thermal performance benefit. And that in a lot of ways, I think is what paved the way for Intus to like really enter the market space and give that value proposition of saying, look, we can give you this like ultra high performance frame, good triple pane glass, low price point. And you beat out at that time, like it was all European systems coming in, right? And I think now, like what I've seen is there's now like this like push to try and say, okay, well, if we have these frames, can we qualify them for like projects that have higher wind loads, right? That have maybe bigger sizes. And this is where, I get a little nervous, right, in that conversation, because you have to be super careful. And I don't think it's a big mystery that there are like legitimate like structural limitations to that product, like the way that the steel interacts with the composites, how you anchor back to the system, the handling, right? Yeah, if your labor rate is low enough that you can field glaze everything and mull it in the field, great. But that's like a very market dependent, like, opportunity, I think, in a lot of ways.
You have a salesperson and engineer on this call. That's why you're hearing the
but like
the dichotomy.
The reality is, at the end of the day, the product is super low cost compared to the equivalent performance in aluminum. So in terms of like thermal performance, right? So I think in a lot of ways it comes down to like what's the goal of the job, right? And if you don't have those architectural constraints, I'm not saying it can't work. Like I think the application of PVC is great for like, or vinyl for the right project, is fantastic. I think it's great that you have that product category that gives you that passive house level performance as a potential target without having to break the bank and go to aluminum. Like that's really important. But I think where it gets a little suspicious to me is like, okay, you can get an AW rating, you can do all these things where you're like mulling together things in the field. But like, is the structural engineer like really confident that's going to work out? Like that's, I don't know, like, it makes me nervous. And, like in New York, some of the projects I worked on, it's like, okay, we're comfortable going with vinyl up to this level, but then that's it. Like anything above this, going to be aluminum, and it's like, okay, like I think there's a logic there that can kind of dictate the placement, but
I'll tell you what Intus did is that word vinyl, they disassociated themselves from it. Yeah. And that's what the whole market's done is UPVC is a made up word. What does it mean? It doesn't mean it means you put something else in your plastic in addition to the plastic.
That's it's still vinyl, right? It's
still vinyl.
Yeah.
But it's become a different mindset. I gave a presentation last week to the AIA Virginia chapter, and I got accredited. And what I wanted to focus on is exactly what you're talking about. And the focus was, what's the difference between punch windows, window wall, and curtain wall? Because we see people all the time talk about punch windows and developer wait, this budget is not a punch window. Your number's too high. We drew punch windows. And so what I focused on in the presentation was gateway sizes and
Mhm.
AMA ratings and how they work and exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
That we can get an AWI rated window. We can go test a 3'6" by 6 foot tall awning window and get AW rating and go, here you go. Here's your AW rating. But to your point, look at the sizes, look at the spans, look at how you're connecting them. And then did that test have steel in it? Because they might not be putting steel in it when they're sending it to site. Did
Yeah.
that test have all the corners sealed in silicone and structural silicone all over the place? So there's a lot of trickery happening right now, and there's a lot of companies offering these UPVC windows, and there's a dime a dozen at this point.
Yeah.
find it-
And
I find it a
there's-
little weird though that what you're talking about is you have a passive house background. You're talking about Massachusetts market that is driven by stretch code. Even if you get to Denver, Seattle, or Toronto or whatever, I see a great fit here. But what we're talking about is Texas and Charlotte and Southern California. So it's kind of funny that like you're up. Oh, I think this window's great for the passive house community, mitigating heat transfer. But get rid of all that for a second and go to a moderate or temperate climate zone. It's cost driven, 100%.
It's all cost driven.
Yeah, I think, the other big value add that's a difference in mindset from a lot of the domestic options in vinyl, right, is custom sizing. I mean, that's like a huge thing too that you can capitalize on, for opportunity where you say, look, like we don't have standard sizes. You give us the sizes you want, configurations you want, we build it per your project requirements, and I think a lot of like the mass market residential, like that usually comes at a bit of a premium, over like
On the
standard.
vinyl side.
Yeah, right. On the
Um,
vinyl side.
Well,
So
Jason, talk to us about other markets outside of New York, because I think New York is a little skewed in terms of you get these architects that, and God bless them, that have contractors that are willing to do it, but there's 400 different window types on the project. So you go to some of these other markets and all of a sudden maybe you have 3 window types and the designers really steered around who the local contractors and suppliers are. So do you think that mindset changes as soon as you get into certain markets?
I think it does. I think it changes, but I think you hit it on the head. It's not energy driven. It's all price driven. Like we have projects coming out right now that are designed with unitized window wall, custom metal panel, infilled in, and then there's an alternate to go with rain screen, stud walls, and UPVC windows. So it's all price driven, and they are in that case they're recognizing I can't do 50% of what's drawn on this facade, but the glass part we can do with UPVC if we keep these openings small, then build all these stud walls. It's all just price driven. And we talked about this last time, Adrian, too, was normal construction. There's a value of speed. There's a value of consistent mullion sizes. There's a value in all the things aluminum can offer. Right now, the value is in what's on the cover sheet to get the finance approved to build the project. And so that seems to be the number one governing thing in all projects where it's unitized window wall or unitized curtain wall, very clearly designed, and they're still willing to change it for one purpose only, which is price. Even if you're adding 4 more trays to the exterior, you're devaluing your waterproofing details, you're losing out on whatever else you can list in this. It's all just going to the price, and it's all coming from Europe. And the European prices of UPVC windows, no one in North America can get to. I mean, there's a lot trying. I mean, there's Peerless, Quaker, Crystal, you name them, they're making a UPVC window, but they're all chasing that number.
Spencer, we're seeing it right now on a project where it's at the finished yard line. They need window wall in April, and I just got notice from the owner. We're 1.3 million over our glazing budget. Get to work and save cost. Okay, we can make some tweaks here and there. Maybe we go with a different glass package, 2-coat instead of 3-coat paint. But do you ever see them last minute go from aluminum to UPVC, or usually is that decision made early on?
it depends on like the design, right? That's the thing that, a lot of the projects that we work on with window wall, like the spans alone prohibit you from going in the vinyl direction safely with mitigated risk, right? Like you'll have some owners that might take that risk, but I think it comes down to like what's the driving criteria. Like sure, if you have a low rise project, punched openings, sizes that structurally are, doable with the vinyl platform, then yeah, you could probably make that switch, right? If there isn't some other governing criteria you need to fulfill. But it's really challenging to make that, like, it's not a 1-for-1. I think that's the key thing that I want to emphasize here, is that there is some overlap in the industry where you can make that substitution, but beyond that, like, you can't push it as far as you can push aluminum, at least structurally, right? And that's pretty obvious to a lot of
I
people,
see you
think.
bring that up a lot though, and what you just said, if an owner's willing to take that risk, I don't think they perceive it as a risk. If a PE is willing to sign off on it and, they have an architect stamping it, they're not thinking about this. So it's like, look at a aluminum window with a big thermal break. At some point, isn't like 60% of it plastic? I mean, I don't know if people fully understand the long-term behavior of these composites or assemblies over time.
They
Well,
move. They move like crazy, and they're going to deteriorate faster. And we all know
yeah,
that.
yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely standards that are set up for, qualifying and testing, structurally thermally broken aluminum profiles, right? And I think the big difference is that you, while you are passing load through those elements, you're typically doing a primary anchorage to a component of the aluminum to the superstructure. With the PVC, it's like if there's steel reinforcing, like you can go through it, but it's like a more complicated load path. And there's limits to how much you can like reinforce those connections before they just become like, you know, almost sort of like non-starters, like in terms of like installation logistics and feasibility, right? But the other big thing structurally is that, with aluminum, you're relying on aluminum components for glass retention. With PVC, you don't have that, right? So a big part of the load is the tributary area of the glass going to the supporting frame and to the glazing beads. And you have a very different thing with PVC. You don't have any steel that's part of that load path.
So Jason, you would know this. Any installed details or for record or as-built details I've seen of UPVC has those little twisty. I saw them on a Schuko project. Those little flimsy aluminum.
Galvanized steel strap anchors. Yeah.
48 of them around the perimeter. So is that just the standard in the UPVC world?
It is. I mean, our installation method is we prefer sill pan versus strap anchors coming through the sill. So we've modified most of our installations at AWI, but 90% of UPVC install is four-sided strap anchors, which is interfering with your interior seal too, especially at the sill where you don't want to have a caulk joint with strap anchors coming through it if you can avoid it. But it's all strap. There are nail fin. None of the nail fins are integral. They're all snap-in nail fins, and we know what those lead to. You're depending on a seal and a nail fin to stop the water in the building. It's not. I would rather use a strap anchor than a snap-in nail fin. I don't trust that snap-in location. So I agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah.
Have you ever taken this to a project that you know is UPVC sold, taken their baseline test, and strung what you're saying out into, hey, look, they're using all these sizes. Here's their test reports. How do you know they're actually meeting it? Like, how deep have you dove on any of the UPVC jobs to prove what you're saying?
In terms of like qualifying the structural integrity of the system or like
Looking at a
validating
project
it?
that you know, validating it. Looking at a project that you know is going UPVC, and you go, their testing is for a different gateway size than what they're using. And I'm just curious if you've ever really dove deep on that on a project.
I mean, I think to Adrian's point, it kind of goes back to like the structural engineer who's putting their neck out to stamp it. That's really where the rubber hits the road, right? And um, like let's be honest here, like any laboratory test, unless it's like a project specific assembly mock-up at like the maximum like worst case condition, is going to be a bit of an abstraction from what you're actually doing on a job typically, right? Like you have testing that's relevant, but I'm not saying that this is like not a good idea. I'm just saying that there's a limit to like how far you can push it. And there's, I think, something really seductive about the pricing of vinyl, or UPVC, I guess as we're calling it, that, a lot of owners will be like, wow, like I'm going to save all that money and go this direction for my fenestration. But, if they don't have like an intelligent architect and engineer who's like validating that, that's where I think you get into that risk area, right? And I mean, how deep have I gone on it? Like I've done coastal facing, UPVC projects that had like direct exposure, on the beach in, Massachusetts, and like huge wind loads, monster wind loads, huge sizes. But we had a structural engineer who was like, okay, like we can make this work. Now the install was robust, like it was a huge number of anchors for each opening. So there again, it's like, your install labor is going to be much higher because you have all these fasteners you have to put in place in the field. And I think all the rough openings were like reinforced engineered, plywood. It's like robust substrates. I think what it comes down to is like where's the threshold where like I don't know if any PVC manufacturer is going to draw the line and say like you're absolutely not going to use this product for this like level of application. They're going to say, well, the structural engineer approved it, like go for it. So I don't know if that
That's
answers the
interesting. Have
question.
you, have you gone to any fabricators that make Rayhow or anything else? And they were like, nope, too much for us.
Height. They will stop. The height seems to be the limit, around 12 foot with most of their products. Width, they'll pretty much wrap buildings. I mean, they'll go floor to ceiling 10 foot and offer wraps. So you're taking out every other layer of glass, putting a fastener through the vertical, putting the glass back in. Our limitation at AWI is avoiding field mulling UPVC as much as possible, because it's the details are not as strong and as tested as aluminum. I will say that UPVC does well in water testing. The welded corners, usually there's cap seal on the IG. I mean, we're having very strong results in field testing for water, which I was surprised about, especially coming from overseas. It's been a positive experience.
Yeah, do you hear? And Elliot has restated that too. Aside from when they have PTAC units in the sill, that's whenever they run into issues.
Yeah.
But other than that, he said he hasn't had one failure in his lab.
No, I've heard stories of sagging sashes, sagging horizontals on a few PVC projects where they didn't put steel in the actual windows, even though the test report showed it. So you will suffer if they don't reinforce it properly. You'll see it's not like aluminum where you might not find it. With this product, you're going to see sagging and you're going to see sashes not closing, and it'll show up if they don't do it. At least that's what I have seen in the market, and I've seen quite a few jobs and problems. They've had to replace a lot of windows.
So what is the
Spencer's-
history behind
Spencer's-
why they do the tilt turn style window, or why they prefer that? Is it just because they're sort of bred as European fenestration, whatever specialists?
Yeah, I mean it's simply that, you have a European vinyl product company. That's their primary market, is the tilt turn market, right? So, I mean, getting back to the point, Jason made earlier about the cost of the dies. Like if you're going to invest in that platform, the inward opening sash for the tilt turn function dictates a lot of your outer frame profiles, your meeting rail profiles. Once you have that, it's like, that's the system. And a lot of it's multi-point locking hardware, so if you wanted to do like a double hung, it's just a totally different product, completely different profiles, different setup, everything. I mean, that's my understanding anyway.
Why the in-swing? Why is all UPVC windows in-swing, and outswing seems to increase cost 40-50%?
So it's interesting. If you look at the sections, it's actually a very similar issue with aluminum from Europe, where the in-swing allows you to also have the glazing beads on the inside very easily for the fixed lights. So as soon as you switch that to an outswing, you change the geometry of the meeting profile so that your longer leg is on the interior. And now that conflicts with your glazing bead configuration, right, for the direction of where the glass is installed from. So I guess one way of looking at it is like, it's kind of all or nothing. Like you could do a platform where it's like all glazed from the outside, all outward opening, right? Or you do all glazed from the inside, all inward opening. I mean, fundamentally, it gets down to like the casement function and the overlap. The other thing in Europe is that the windows are weeped, right? So when you have that weeping profile, that pressure equalized chamber between the sash and the frame, the inward opening is like much easier to configure and fabricate for drainage and for getting that center gasket in place. So
Wasn't Quest like sort of standard or baseline? Am I totally butchering this in swing or no?
Only in New York. So in New York, we use an in-swing casement because that's what New York demands, because they pretend they're going to clean it from the inside, open every other window, which they never do. Outside of New York, we're all outswing awning windows. Our in-swing casement's a Metro product with a high U value on it. It's actually a premium product that we use in New York just to meet the in-swing requirement. But I mean, there's tons of outswing windows that are interior glazed. The majority of aluminum windows are outswing interior glazed. So is it just the makeup of? I'm not following the comment you made of why you can't interior glaze an outswing window.
No, you can. It's just if you have a combination of like fixed light and operable.
He's talking about if you do a master frame and have multiple fixed light, fixed, operable, fixed, or if in that condition, both either have to be interior or exterior glazed.
Right. The profile between them has to be like a Z shape is what you end up with. And depending on how you build the corners, like a lot of the European frames, they're mitered all four sides, right? So if you have like outward opening sash on one side, fixed light on the other with a single mullion, now your outer frame, like you need something else to switch that glazing bead configuration, right? Typically, it's either like an additional profile or something like that to allow you to have the glass removable from the interior. So, I mean, that's I'm speaking very generically, right, about like most European filter and window systems, right? And it just happens to apply also to vinyl. But
Well,
the
it's funny
cleaning
on
is
the project I was just mentioning, I last week when I saw the GC, and he's newer to the project, and he said, "Why the hell are you guys doing in swing here? Like, what is that?" And I'm like, "It's our standard product." It's, you
yeah,
know, but they don't. You go to other markets and they don't understand it, and it conflicts with our shade pocket and blah 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 blah.
And the screens on the outside. Architects, I mean, outside of New York,
yeah,
people are not used to seeing screens on the outside of the building anymore. They're very used to an interior screen where the architect has a nice, beautiful glass picture. And like one of the biggest heartbreaks for every architect I talk to at UPVC is that I'm going to see the screens on the outside. Yes, in-swing product. So it's
yeah,
definitely a complaint. It might slow down the dinosauring of the outswing aluminum, but that's
yeah.
one of the biggest complaints I've heard.
Well, I
I mean,
recently realized that I live in a BV glazing building, and I didn't know it was them.
Oh.
And I don't want to disclose where I live, but you know, certain New York
Careful, they only
installers
have
put
a
it
few
in.
there.
I'll let you know that. But they have roto outswings, and
Yeah.
let's say I don't know if you might need to be a little bit stronger than 5 pounds to open that. I'll say that. But no, I love it. It sheds the water, and you know, I'm used to living in in-swing buildings, but it you can leave it open during a rainstorm. Right, Spencer? I mean, this
I
goes
mean,
against your blood, but you know,
An awning window, yes.
awning
yeah.
windows, yeah, top hung awning, yeah. No, I mean the hardware is also one of the critical pieces, right? If you have the screen on the inside, you don't want to wick it. It's got to be some kind of roto operator, which
Or an OS. OS. We use the
or
Fabine
OS, yeah, right,
Yeah, and it's a European hardware outswing, and the screen
right,
does
This
not
is an
require that level
ex-peerless
of
guy you're
wicket.
talking to, or ex-peerless dealer rather.
yeah,
So no, you
Me
probably
too.
installed a lot of OS, right?
Oh yeah, a ton. I mean, I'm a current Peerless installer when the job calls for it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
we've done a ton of OS operating windows. I mean, the Roto, I was told by a developer about 10 years ago they were sued for closed fist ADA on the Roto, and they lost.
yeah.
And it was at that moment that Quest changed from Roto to OS operators, and we've never gone back.
so
It's a
I
big
have
developer too.
one question that I'm going to put Jason on the spot here, and then we're going to get back to the topic at hand. How do you qualify an ADA compliant operable window?
Pray. um, so you know, it's a good question. I don't know how to answer it. OS operators are typically ADA compliant. There is a breakaway that is different than the operating force, and they're two different things. So most windows with OS operators, rotos, etc., will operate at 5 pounds of force. If you end up with someone complaining about the breakaway, then you take the gasket out and tell them the building's going to leak. So you have to understand the code and how to talk about it, especially with like sliding glass doors and terrace doors and things that even have a heavier breakaway force to them. With the OS, they have different size operators. So typically, if you have someone complaining because you have the 3-inch bar on there and you take a 6-inch handle, that leverage will solve that problem. So we've been able to combat complaints without any issue. It has not been a problem. Hung windows, sliding windows, it's a whole different conversation, Adrian. Which
So yeah, so when you say breakaway, you mean it like another word, initiation force. So that's what I used to initiation force, and then operating force, and then closing force. So like you're describing, we had a project where they wanted they want to exceed certain air water infiltration requirements, and so to get a tighter compression seal around the perimeter, we were saying the weather strip gaskets that we had to utilize to get that tighter strip required more than 5 pounds of force to get you in your lock position. So like you said, remove the gasket. So how do you then apply that to terrace doors? And then let's bring this back to vinyl. I think the DC market specifically, they usually want it to be FHA compliant, right?
100%, 100% FHA, and that's pretty much most cities that we're in.
So what does that mean? And you still have the 1/4-inch step apply? And in those instances, have you put in any UPVC doors?
We have we have a ADA sill tested UPVC terrace door, passed field testing.
Well, at what, 5 pounds?
5 pounds in the field, yes.
Really? Okay, so I wasn't
Yeah.
I was joking, but that's serious. So is that like a 1/3 approved reduction, or was
Yeah,
it
it's
spec 5 pounds?
eight PSF lab test, 5 pounds in the field, passed on the first go. I mean, where FHA technically gives you 3/4 inch versus a 1/4 inch on the height of the sill, but you're not designing a building where the FHA and the ADA units are going to be different. You get everything down to a 1/4 inch because it's going to be the same condition everywhere. It's again, the only issue with doors is that breakaway, and you're going to be 35 pounds is the allowed force to open a door. It's 5 pound operating, but 35 pound on actually getting the thing open. So understanding it and knowing how to answer the questions is how we survive that question
they
in the
can use a
field.
crowbar to open it.
Right. And look, do you really want a 5-year-old to be able to open a terrace door on the 30th floor with no problem at all? I don't think so.
I thought you were going to
It's
say someone in a wheelchair, but yeah, I mean, same idea in terms of Spencer. I don't remember which podcast this was, maybe a year ago. You were talking about some of your West Coast nightmares with terrace doors and having to deal with as-built conditions and the concrete was out of tolerance and blah, blah, blah. So Jason, if we are either UPVC suppliers or aluminum suppliers trying to design an FHA door for you that is 12 PSF in the lab and can give you 8 in the field, what the hell do we do?
tested a quarter inch out of square when you test it. Don't test it perfect.
Mm.
We've done that with our lift and glide doors. We've passed perfect, and then we go, okay, let's start messing with it. Pick the rate up a quarter inch, put a hump in the center, see what happens then. And that's your answer, because concrete is, as you said, imperfect. But I mean, terrace doors definitely are the hardest to pass in the field. It's always a corner gasket or a corner seal or something that's going to be real minuscule because a pinhole of water came in an ADA test. But my answer would be, when you're in the lab, test in perfect conditions and see where you fall out.
Yeah, and test simulating an actual install condition, right? I've seen so many lab tests for terrace doors where it's like in a buck, like you would do a window, and the threshold is just like not even close to the actual like application in the field, and it wildly changes the drainage at the sill. And that's where I've seen, people get burned in the past. It's like, oh, well, we have this lab test that shows like 15 PSF. It's like, yeah, but you don't have a door threshold sill condition in your lab test. You have a buck, it's like no different than a window. So really important distinction.
I should clarify, outswing doors is what I'm referring to about all this
Yeah.
testing. In-swing door field testing is a nightmare, and I'd recommend not contracting to it.
Yeah.
And we've been successful at that. We've been successful saying, here's your 12-pound lab test for this in-swing door. Spencer tested the way you just described. We're not field testing this.
Right.
We won't agree to it because your
Right.
concrete's imperfect and there's an in-swing door, and we don't recommend in-swing doors. So if you're going to use them, that's our qualification.
Do you
they're a nightmare.
see a liability with, so let's counter that stance, in-swing products versus out-swing products, and any liability with like wind, it getting picked up in the wind or left open in a high wind event?
I think it's less liability because you're not worried about it going airborne and falling on the
Meaning,
sidewalk.
I think that's where in-swing can be a safer alternate.
Yeah.
I saw a failure of an outswing casement just completely dislodge the sash during a high wind event. And yeah, no, I live in it right now. I mean, high wind, sometimes the terrace door is going all over the place and you have to, use 2 hands to pull it back in. We're talking about extreme conditions here though. Back to your point, Jason, earlier about the finish. What are the limitations right now in terms of what the Rayhouse of the world can offer?
They're using a foil finish. I think most of the UPVC guys are now, and it seems to be the world's your oyster. Now there's a large standard, I think 45 something colors they have in that book, but they'll custom match on big enough projects is what I'm seeing.
No warranty limitations? Well, of course there are some, but will they?
15-year standard warranty.
So do you see 20-year specs or no?
We do, and they'll give the 20 if they're asked for it. I've actually, and Spencer, I'm curious how much foil you've encountered, because I'm newer to the UPVC world. We have 4 buildings installed. We're about to start installing a few more. I find the finish to be very durable, shockingly durable, a lot more than what I expected, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best way to go. I would say, this was years ago, but I've done projects where, there was like a liquid paint applied to it, which I wouldn't recommend. Much, much harder to control durability in the outcome, but gives you that custom color match to something that also has a liquid paint applied. The foil is the way to go. The other thing I've seen is aluminum clad PVC, which is interesting, but certainly comes at a premium and is really easy to screw up in production and get the tolerances wrong. But for the right job, that can also be, like an elegant solution. But then at that point, you're paying for aluminum cladding on a PVC
Right,
window.
for
It's
what?
like,
Just because they
why
want the
not?
liquid paint look?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. It's mostly architectural finish, right? Because you can get an aluminum substrate over the vinyl. Yeah, so anodized, whatever, get it to match a panel or something that might be on the cladding. And it looks arguably, to some people looks like better in some cases, or it looks like a more robust, it looks like an aluminum window from the outside. And that has some value to some people, right?
How much cheaper is it at that point though? Like really? I mean, aren't you really kind of
Yeah,
closing
I
in
mean,
on the
you're adding a
delta.
massive premium to do that. So then at that point, it's like, what, is there that much of a value add to staying with the vinyl? I'm not sure, but yeah, I think the foil finishes are, from what I've seen, like they can be fantastic. What gets tricky is when you have patterns in play, because you can do like a wood grain foil finish, or you can do like a textured, and that can get really difficult to control with how that texture gets applied to the profiles and then how they meet up. But if it's a solid color, I would say foil is the way to go.
What's more durable, aluminum wet paint or UPVC foil, vinyl foil?
So you're asking, is powder coat more durable on
Powder
aluminum?
coat or wet? Kynar or powder coat, either one versus foil UPVC. Because I think I'll put it out there. I think UPVC is the answer based on what I've seen in the field so far. I don't
Well,
have the dings and damage that I do with aluminum that come from painters and masons that I don't see that as much on the UPVC foils, and I was shocked by that.
yeah, I think we need maybe to define durability. If you're talking like hardness and like scratch resistance,
Yes.
yeah, the foil probably wins out most of the time. I mean, there's certain classes of anodized finish that can get pretty resilient as well, but I don't know with like fade resistance how that looks long term. My guess would be like the aluminum finish is probably the safer bet, just because of the AMA classifications and like the long testing that's at play to validate some of that stuff with UV exposure.
Mhm.
But yeah, certainly the resilience. I mean, it's a totally different application of material, right? Like with aluminum, you're inherently not going to have the same hardness as you will with the finish on the foil on the PVC, just because you're applying a paint, or a powder coat to a substrate and then baking it on. It's like it's a different thing than actually like adhering, like a foil, PVC foil to a PVC substrate.
I mean, Adrian, do you remember the days when they were just spray painting vinyl windows like a car, taping off half the window, taking paint? You look at the side of the window and see the paint creeping to their tape line, and I mean that stuff was weak. That stuff you could scratch off with a pencil. They've
Part
come a
of the
long way
reason
the
why
past
I
20
wanted
years.
to have Spencer on and hear it from you, I didn't think this would become a Ray House sponsored podcast, but he Spencer has come a long way, and I'm getting him there, and I don't sell you PVC yet, at least, but we're getting to the point where he is seeing the reality of what's in. You said it best. He's stopped swimming against the current. So what does the actual selling process look like, though? And sorry for coming my mouth. How is it any different than what you've experienced at Schuco, Spencer? And especially there's a disconnect between you and the fabricator and Ray House. So, you know, the developers, the GCs want to hear you. Maybe they need to hear from a contractual standpoint, talk to you. But who are they ultimately like getting buy-in on the material side, the fabricator or Ray House or whoever it is?
I mean, look, it's from what I've experienced in the past, it's driven by two criteria initially: performance and price, right? And it's very simple. It's like, if you can hit this price point and give us a window that meets these like architectural sizes, as long as you give us the warranties that we're asking for, like it's not such a big deal, right? And I
Well, for
think,
Jason to do the best job he can do, he needs to be able to come to his best client and say, hey, buddy, I got option A, B, C for you. I'm comfortable with either or. You choose what you want. That's what makes a good glazing contractor. So if he does choose option C, he's got to get some substance behind him, somebody that can speak to the performance, speak to the fabrication. So at that point, I guess, Jason, are you looping in the fabricator or people from back in Europe or whatever that looks like?
Looping in the fabricator when the time comes. But I mean, there's architects don't like UPVC, which is the positive side for us aluminum guys. So I'll turn this back into aluminum. And you hit it on the head. It's understanding what they want first. When you look at a rendering of a new building, all your vertical moles are the same size. Well, you look at UPVC, your moles are going to be 4 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches. It depends which products are being molded to which. So it's a very different product. Punched windows, which has a huge definition to it, that's the right application if they make the sizes within the tested size of a UPVC. And honestly, we don't really need to bring the fabricator in too much because we know what their tests are. We have the test reports. We're in the pre-con process. We as a company decide what product to use where, and then meet with the client, understand what they want, and then we bring the fabricator into a more dialed-in meeting. But we can get them to a choice without bringing fabricators in. And you don't really want to do that either because you don't want to, I guess, put one product against the other. What we try and do is say, here's what you're trying to achieve. Here's how you can achieve it. We can go faster, we can be more consistent, we can wrap your tower floor a week with aluminum, or You can build us punched openings, get a cold form framer. You're going to add a few weeks per floor, but your price is going to be this. And does this work for your design? And then once you have the answer, you then kind of take your target. It's a hard sell because there's so many products out there, and there's so many UPVC windows that are popping up. I mean, they're all over. Octoplast is in New York now too. I think they've been there a couple of years. So there's quite a few that are just flooding prices everywhere.
But you have
Bring them in when the time's right.
you have a huge reach nationwide now, and you need to bring whatever's appropriate to the specific climate. And can you speak about your Southern California project? Or
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We're doing the One Beverly Tower for Layton, and we're using the Rainers product, which for our organization is a new step where we are not using an internal manufactured product, but we are using our facility in Texas to fabricate it, and it helped us get more competitive and get past some of the tariff issues, get everything here to the States, and then use our Texas facility to help that. But go ahead with the question. That job is now talkable.
Spencer's smiling, and I'm looking at him because he knew about that job way before I did.
It's a high-end aluminum. No UPVC is going on that building.
Yeah, I mean, it was a job that's been around for a long time, and one of the more notable projects happening in that part of the world right now, where there's not a whole lot of action. So that's the other high visibility component to it. But yeah, I wouldn't imagine they would go UPVC for that. But again, it kind of fits that classification that we keep going back to of like, what's the fit and finish? What's the architectural goal? The spans and kind of. There's also something to be said, which we haven't touched on, which is like, anytime you're interacting with the product, like if you have a vinyl window and you're operating that and touching it, interacting with it, has a certain kind of quality to it that, for certain projects it's fine. But, if you're doing like a key mark architectural job, they're not going to want that. They're going to want you to have like hands-on aluminum products, something more solid, something that just has a different level of fit and finish. So yeah, that's totally understandable.
And narrower sight lines and all the other things that come with aluminum. That UPVC, right. You're never going to get a narrow sight line. It just gets bigger.
Yeah, I mean, I almost look at it this way, and maybe this is a bit generic, but UPVC in a lot of ways is like a commodity product now. I mean, there's just so many options. It's so price driven, kind of limited in application, like definitely appropriate in the market, but architectural aluminum is like, it's just that, like it's more bespoke, if we could call it that. It
is. And you make a good point that we should say before this podcast ends, which is, it is a commodity. You and I could go open tomorrow with a screw boss and a silicone gun and start making Rayhow windows. Anyone can fabricate it. So same thing with YKK and Connier and storefront curtain wall products. You got truck and ladder guys, and then you have fabrication shop guys. And it's going to be interesting is there's a lot of people fabricating the same commodity stick, whether it's Becca, whether it's Rayhow, even Intis's extruder is being used by other people now too.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to have the same testing. These extruders don't put out their actual fabricated test reports. They put out what they can do, but it's the job of the fabricator to prove they can make it, and they can make it correctly. And I'm seeing that happen with, I'll call them truck and ladder UPVC guys who are throwing numbers out there that are probably using screw bosses and silicone, not welding the corners, and they don't have test reports, but they're following the trail. Hey, I have Rayhow. Hi,
right.
Look, I have it here too. It's not the same thing, and that's happening a lot too.
In last question, because we could go on for a long time about this. Are they? I don't want to say Rayhow specifically, but some of these suppliers being selective about what fabricators they work with, or they'll sell to anybody?
What I've seen is they'll sell to anybody. They'll partner selectively, but if you want to buy their stick, you can buy their stick.
But their priority is not developing relationships with glazing contractors. It's fabricators.
It is, and I'll give one plug if anyone listens this long. The Leon Integra, who I'm working with in Boston, their unique relationship with Rayhow, where Rayhow is putting focus into them as a partner, because the stick and ladder or truck and ladder method has hurt the reputation in a lot of circles. So they're seeing the Boston Leon Integra having success, going, hey, how'd you do that? And then putting a little more effort into them, which is helping us get accessories and testing and some other stuff that everyone's still trying to catch the bus. It's moving very fast right now. And slow, because there's not a lot of work. So the bus is there's not a lot of buses out there.
Good point. Well,
I'm in Seattle. I landed here today, and it's the first time I have driven in Seattle and not seen a crane in the 15 years I've been coming here.
Did you know Spencer lives in Seattle?
Yeah.
I didn't know you were there.
I did not.
Yeah, I sit in Seattle. Yeah, it's been brutal past like 18 months. Have been really, really tough in this market. Yeah.
It's rough. Hopefully it picks up. We have some work in Oregon, so we're still using our Seattle office to run the Oregon work at the moment, but there's no cranes.
Yeah, I mean, there's don't get me wrong, there's a lot of construction happening. A lot of it doesn't have windows, right? It's mostly for like data centers and
Data
all kinds of
centers.
other stuff, right? So yeah.
We should do a mental health report showing why they need more daylight in data centers. Do like a health study on the staff of data centers, and they're all depressed. They need more daylight. We got to sell them windows.
They'll take 3 windows and qualify it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thanks for hopping on, guys. This was fun.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yes.